Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live to the public. For those who are not able to watch live, the webcast will be recorded and made available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. I've received apologies from Mr. Richardson. I've also received apologies from Mr. Galton and welcome Mr. Bill, who's acting as substitute on his behalf today. So we move on to item 1, which is the minutes of the meeting that were held on the 12th of June 2023, and that's on pages 3 to 14 of your agenda. I move these are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed? Okay. And item 2 is question time. I've not been advised of any questions from the public. Item 3 is questions asked by members under Standing Order number 7. I've not received any such questions. Item 4 is urgent items. I've not received any urgent items. Next, item 5 is declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest they wish to declare? No. And item 6 is declarations of the party whip. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? No. Item 7, I've not received any petitions. This therefore moves us on to the first substantive item, which is agenda item 8, investing in Leicestershire's programme annual performance report for 2022-23, which is on pages 15 to 52 of your paperwork. John Bennett, who is head of strategic property services, is presenting the report, and Mr. Bushden and Mr. Brecken are in attendance as well in respect of all the items on the agenda for this meeting. Welcome and thank you for attending. So if I hand over to you, John, if you want to introduce this item, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. It is my pleasure once again to present the annual report for the County Council's Investment Fund, which was previously the Corporate Asset Investment Fund. This is the first time it is being presented as the Investing in Leicestershire Annual Performance Report. Whilst the change only represents 1/4 of the financial year, it is a fundamental change or pivot from a previous near decade of direction and strategy. Where once we led with the fund being directly linked to providing much needed revenue income to help support frontline services, revisions to guidance and laws and rules from HN Treasury and SIPFA have meant that we have to ensure that financial considerations are not the primary reason for investment and development of the fund. So they can be a reason to invest, just not the primary reason. That said, while the fund's primary objectives may be a mix of regeneration, job creation, housing, renewable energy and addressing market failure, the Commission may recall from my presentation in January, it's important to remember that we've continued to ensure, even with the financial pressures that the fund has faced, that the fund has been a continuing success since its inception in 2014. The County Council continues to be prudent and has never borrowed externally to support the fund. Whilst the primary aim of the fund is no longer to generate an income in itself, it is still considered good financial management to ensure that the newly adopted strategy, the County Council's assets, achieve a good return. Turning now to these returns. The Commission will see in paragraphs 18 and 19 of the cover report that the fund increased in value over the year by £26.7 million, with directly held property assets having a net increase of £3 million and indirect assets such as private debt, the pool property infrastructure and bank risk share funds increasing by £24 million. As per paragraph 20, it can be seen that direct property assets, including development land, achieved an overall positive return of 11.2%. The overall figures for direct and indirect investments do disguise, to a certain extent, the movement of each asset class. As per page 23 of the pack, the Commission will note these variations from the office sector being down £4 million in capital value, albeit generating 3 times the income of the rest of the direct property assets, industrial and distribution up £2 million, the rural farm estate down £4 million, and sites under development up £10 million in value. And on the indirect assets, while the pooled property assets reduced in value by £6 million, private debt increased by £5 million, and the fund benefited from £22 million worth of new investment in pooled infrastructure and bank risk sharing funds. As regards the income performance, there has been a slight drop. The increase in returns to the fund of 2.3 million over the year by the direct property assets was cancelled out by a drop in income from the pooled property debt, which in previous years it had benefited from. We are holding a significant amount of land in advance of development, particularly Lutterworth East, that does not currently generate any income. Removing this increases the net income to 3.2%, as per page 27. The diversifiers had a low return due to a significant level of the new investment, and this will catch up in future years. Removing the diversifiers to leave just the buildings we own and in service, the income return was 4.5%. This is lower than we'd usually expect, as the rural estate did not contribute with the debt provision increase that we've put in. When capital growth is added, this will increase above the national interest rate. The table at the top of page 31 sets this out. And for most of this period, the national interest rate was less than 1%. We do need to be mindful of the national interest rate, and if there was a better long-term alternative, we would look into it. I'd also like to clarify a point on page 27, which refers to the £5.1 million by 2027 to cover unspecified central cost and resourcing. We put aside money each year so that the funding is available to deal with one-off costs that arise with any property portfolio, for example, bringing a unit up to date at the end of a lease to attract new tenants. The expectation is that the 5.1 million will be held by the end of 26-27, and as we build up our experience, the level held will be continually assessed, and if it is too high, released to support other services. Turning to page 29 in the directly let property of the fund, the Commission will note that the total return was 6.7% against a target of 6%, this percentage being the income growth plus capital growth. Whilst a fall of 1.3 percentage points from 21-22, this compares well against the national benchmark of nearly minus 15%. Due to the valuation date being just after last September's mini budget, these figures do not consider the impact of that budget on the economy and the property investment and development market in particular, but this will be evaluated this coming October. As an aside, we did have a look at what impact the budget would have had if the valuation had been at March 23 as opposed to October 22. Overall, we believe that £7.4 million would have been removed from the capital value of the direct property investments, the majority of this, £7 million, being the impact on our office capital values. There was very little effect on income, as that's not going to be impacted, and say we had a major office lease expiring during those 6 months, which meant possibly lower rents being achieved than in the past. So whilst the capital value went down and the income stayed the same, the result was it actually improved the income return for the fund as a percentage of capital value by approximately 6%. Therefore, overall, the impact on the total returns to the fund we estimate to be a 1.3% deficit. It will be interesting to see in the forthcoming October valuation whether there has been any stabilisation in values or whether the impacts that we foresaw as of March come to pass. Turning back to the report on page 29, the Commission will note the reasons behind the various asset sector performances of the fund, but I'd like to concentrate a moment, if I may, on the rural estate. This sector of the fund enjoyed substantial capital growth underpinned by securing a valuable residential planning permission, but the income from the farm estate fell slightly year on year. Overall, it looks like a negative capital impact, but that was because some land was removed from the farm estate and moved into development capital. Following difficulties on a particular farm in recent years, we decided to instigate an independent review of the way in which we manage the farm estate. This review is wide-ranging and covers subjects such as the management and monitoring of the portfolio, data management, compliance, key performance indicators, programming and budgeting, resourcing, rent reviews and lease renewals, and the approvals process for new tenants. It will also cover diversification opportunities, such as using our natural capital and renewable energy schemes, and examine the advantages and disadvantages in-hand farming, where the contractors are brought in to farm the land directly on behalf of the County Council, rather than letting it out on leases. We are also reviewing the terms of our farm business tenancies. There are already indications showing that there are not insubstantial opportunities for improving the income from the farm estate. The annual report also provides an update on where we are with other major projects, such as Leaders Farm, where we're at the stage of tendering the construction of the 2 new drive-through units, which will be built during the current year and contributing 100 full and part-time jobs to Lutterworth from summer 24. Airfield Business Park continues to be a success and will be the subject of the next report. At Lutterworth East, alongside colleagues at Harborough District Council, we successfully defended the planning permission from legal challenge at the High Court last December. However, the delay initially securing the planning permission, denial of Housing Infrastructure Fund from Homes England, the delay caused by the judicial review, impacts of COVID and substantial cost inflation over that period has meant that the scheme as costed and applied for in 2019 is no longer relevant or viable in 2023. The Commission will note that discussions are already underway with colleagues at Harborough to make the scheme viable and as attractive as possible, and our search for a delivery partner is also underway to provide the much needed new homes in due course. I would like to take this opportunity to point out a typo that's been shown to me on the last paragraph of the Lutterworth East update. It should say oven ready and not over ready. This scheme is very much of interest to many residential and master developers and has not passed its sell-by date, so to speak. The other major scheme at Stony Stanton is tied to the Blaby District Local Plan Review, so any planning application is not currently expected to be submitted by the consortium of landowners until at least January 25. I understand there may have been some confusion over the terminology report regarding returns and yields. Whilst we will seek to make it more transparent and understandable in the future, if there's any explanation required of either equivalent yields or total property returns, etc., I will be pleased to assist on that point. But otherwise, that is the end of my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And your comments will be reported to Cabinet on the 15th of September. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for going through the report.
Local authorities have got in trouble with substantial borrowings, notably Thurrock, so we don't have any external borrowings. And of course, note that the raison d'etre of investing in Leicestershire is different to the camp, because now it's not just about returns, it's about investing in Leicestershire, and this is the first quarter of that. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I struggled with revaluations, returns, yields, etc. But I noticed we've got 5.8% net return, which isn't too bad. It's better than what you'd get if it was in the bank. So I really know the questions. I think Jono's got some questions for you on yields, returns and revaluations, which are blind me with science sometimes. So.
Thank you, Mr. Weston. Mr. Brecon.
Yeah, I think it's just to add, I think it's a good report. I think it's sensible. I think we've been prudent, with our sort of uses of our resources and our investments. It's short term and long term. And I think the CIPRA guidelines have been met, that they were evaluated and we meet them. So we are able to do this. And I think it's a good report. And I thank John and his team for it. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Bill, I saw you had your hand raised.
Yes, yes, thank you, Chairman. I do welcome the opening remarks, Mr. Bennett, that finances should not be the only consideration in this subject. But can I just refer you to page 41 of the report, the appendix, M69 Junction 2 to Stony Stanton. Now on Tuesday, we open up the planning inspectorate's hearing into the freight depot at Stony Stanton. I won't call it a rail freight depot because there won't be any rails there. It'll just be a massive warehouse, sprawl the size of Burbage. I do hope that people will turn up to actually express their views for or against. I've expressed my view on this over the last 5 years, the total destruction of the countryside. And I'm afraid that this proposal here will mean that there will not be, if this goes ahead and all the other proposals go ahead, around that area, there won't be any countryside left around Junction 2 at the moment. If you drive along Sapcut Road out of Burbage into Sapcut, and all around you there is farmland, very pleasant farmland and open countryside. But if all these proposals now come to fruition as intended by developers, there will not be any countryside left between Earl Shilton, Stony Stanton, Sapcut. I know I've been saying the same thing over and over again, but the prospect of losing all that countryside just fills me with dread. I don't know about anybody else. And I'd just like to be recorded as once again saying that I very much hope that all the developments around Burbage Common and across to Stony Stanton and Sapcut don't get any further than they'll be on record once again of just restating the position which I've held for 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bill. Mr. Morgan, did you raise your...
Thank you very much, Chair. It was really just a quick question on I think probably just sort of understanding yields versus the rate of return on the investment overall because I think obviously as the report makes very clear, and as you've just said, John, you know, the what we're looking at is actually more than just property. It's also debt financing and all sorts of other bits and pieces that are actually in there as far as the overall investment package. And I think it's just being very clear about where we're using the terminology on yields in relation particularly to so we can then compare it to the private sector and other investment packages elsewhere, because the yield is often sort of quite a ring-fenced description, and for it to be able to be used comparatively between different organisations, it's quite useful to be able to actually categorically say our yield on property is X, or net yield is X. Whereas obviously the report talks about also some of our other investments on sort of financial packaging as well. So our overall rate of return, I guess, is X. Our yield on property is Y, and therefore it's sort of making sure that the two are actually sort of split out. And reading through this, I sometimes found it a little bit hard to actually trace what was actually a yield on property investment or net yield on property investment, and that it was actually on current or on what we actually spent on property rather than necessarily what the current valuation was sometimes on some of our property, because obviously, again, you know, the report talks about changes in valuation sometimes in relation to sales or purchases of property, and as a result the overall figure probably is not actually a yield in relation to that, because actually a yield should be about the investment in the specific property and the rate of return that we're actually getting from through rent, etc., rather than necessarily sort of transactional costs on the portfolio, which I guess is then a rate of return on the portfolio investments as a whole. So it's just being clear, and I think it's just useful. So if nothing else, as councillors and for members of the public, that it's very clear what we're actually comparing, with other organisations internally and externally. And I appreciate for us, it's what we're interested in is headline figure, what we're getting income wise, which is great to see. But sometimes quite useful to actually get stuff split down so it's easy to compare with other organisations. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. We'll intend to make it extra clarity next time around.
Thank you. Mrs. Hack.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think that, it's always really useful to see a summary of activities through the year and where we're going as an authority, particularly on financial matters. I think that I just wanted to pick up on the very small point that you did raise at the beginning, was the investments are about economic wealth, not just cash, but the bulk of the report is about the cash yield. And I didn't know whether or not there could be any more sort of summary elements around economic benefit. I know it's covered in the detail per site, per scheme, but actually I didn't know whether or not there was an opportunity to reflect on it wasn't just financial, that we could look at what the economic wealth generating of the fund actually is in the future. And I didn't know if that was possible, you know, the triple bottom line kind of stuff. Thank you.
Chair, if I can answer that. Yes, and in fact on the next report on Airfield Farm, you know, we do go into that sort of level of detail, and you're right, and future reports will bring back, you know, how many jobs were created as a result of the fund, and what the impact on the local economy in the wider region is as well. Yeah, we will certainly do that.
Thank you, John. Does any other member, Mrs. Page?
Yes, thank you very much for the very comprehensive intro, and it made quite a lot of things clear. And but I'm still a little bit confused. There are an awful lot of percentage figures given. For instance, we are talking returns are in excess of 8% on page 34. We're talking about yield, but as I understand it, we are looking at our net income value, yes, because that is the most important thing. Clarify that for me, please. And in your rhetoric and your introduction, you said that it's worked out at 2.6% at October 22. However, if we would have looked at March 23, we are at another 1.3%, which to my reckoning would then be a net income value of 3.9%, which is still underneath or beneath the national interest. So just explain that to me. And are we looking to achieve then in future years with all of the changes to get at least net return in line with the national interest figures? Thank you.
In terms of the target return for the fund overall is 7%. So what we're expecting to be able to achieve once the capital that we've invested in the sites under development, etc., once they are built out and let and producing income, overall is a 7%. So overall target under the strategy is 260 million as our first stepped target. We expect from that 260 million, 7% of that to then be the income that's being driven from both the property assets and the indirect property assets, as the pool property, the infrastructure fund, etc. So overall, we're striving for that 7%. Until we get there, because we've got so much land under development, I mean, there's a substantial, over £30 million out on Lutterworth East, for example. Until we start actually generating income or cash back from those sites, also Airfield Farm and Leaders Farm, etc., then we can't achieve our overall figure. But it's still the plan, and we're still on track to achieve that. But because of planning delays and scheme redraws, we're just not quite at that 7% at the moment. So there is a slight lag, but we have a plan to ensure that we get to the 7%. And also, with regard to the straight income, we do have to invest in order to be able to achieve the income. And any investment that we do does have an impact overall. So it's really important that when we're looking at, going back to Councillor Morgan's point, sort of net initial yield is the function of the current or proposed rent, net of the cost of being able to achieve that. And then we're looking at the all property returns. We then look at all of the net investment yields of the fund, but also take into account where those rents are likely to be. So then we've got the added sort of complication, if you like, of reversionary yields. And what I try to avoid in this report is going into too much of the valuation detail behind that. But if you like, a separate work through on where we are with the various target yields and returns, then I'll be pleased to be able to put something together if that helps.
Yeah, that would be good. Thanks, John.
Yes. Thank you. That was very comprehensive. And yes, with chairmans and I see members nodding, that would be great. And at this point, would be remiss not to introduce Simone Hines, who is the newest member of our team. Welcome, Simone, because
Welcome, Simone. And Mr. Poland, you had your hand up.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the presentations. We've talked about the wider benefits sort of beyond sort of the immediate economic ones for our investments. And one that sort of caught my eye is the solar farm development in Quorn. It's on page 39. It says, in addition to the financial benefits detailed below, that once developed, the scheme will have the capability of offsetting more than 2,000 tonnes of CO2 annually, which is greater than the total carbon emissions of all county council buildings. Obviously, we've got a commitment to be net zero as an organisation, and then ultimately net zero as a county. Will that get us there on its own, or will we need an additional bit more to get us over for the vehicles and so forth before we can say that we are in fact net zero as an organisation?
From a property perspective, the report's right in that Quorn will offset the buildings. In order to offset all of the county council emissions, as you say, whether it's fleet, etc., more is required. And so we've undertaken an independent assessment of those parts of the rural farm estate that could support either wind and solar, or wind or solar. And from a short-ish list of 15 potential sites, we then brought that down to 8, and now we're looking at 3 high potential sites. But the issue that we've got is that the National Grid needs to undertake quite a lot of upstream work. So we're not thinking, or rather the advice from National Grid at the moment is that 2035 is likely to be the first time that any new site, certainly in this region, will be able to be connected to the grid. So the only option we've got then is providing renewable energy via a hard wire to a high use operator, such as quarrying, etc. But we're not quite there yet. But certainly we've got the 2035 point, which will, if we have schemes that are ready to go at that point, offset everything that the county council does.
Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you very much. Quorn Solar Farm is in my division, and we are very pleased about this because when it's explained as well, some people don't like solar farms, but actually environmentally, besides offsetting carbon emissions, maintain it as far as the hedges, the trees, they're not impinging on. It's actually closer to Barrow upon Soar than Quorn, but it's in the division of Quorn. And also there is for wildlife, and also for many solar farms, they actually use the grazing underneath for sheep and things like that. But also for wildlife, there is a huge area that is often protected. So this, I think solar farms personally, we tick an awful lot of boxes, and taking into Mrs. Hack's comments about the effect environmentally and economically on residents, I think this is an excellent use of our, and if you see that it expected a return of 9%, and the other thing we had was that once it's all up and running, and I believe I'm right in this, the actual vehicle movements on it are the equivalent of about one small van once a week. Everything else is automatic. So I just wanted to say that this type of investment, costs a lot of money, but the investment return ticks an awful lot of boxes. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any other member have any questions, comments, Mr. Ashton?
Yeah. So when it was the cave, it was particularly easy, and we had like the target return. And we're keen on that because obviously everything we get back in subsidises council tax. And of course, everybody knows we've no down money. So if we are now having the incorporating benefits to Leicestershire, I think Amanda is right that we ought to have something in there that demonstrates something other than pure return. So he's got his target of 7%. I just wonder if we have a target for the other bit of what it now is, which I don't, as far as I'm aware, I don't think we have. I mean, obviously, as the leader, I'm keen to maximise the revenue we get in because it saves taxing for the members of the public to pay for things. But if we are going to have it as and it is now the Investing in Leicestershire programme, I think it would be useful, as Amanda says, to certainly report on what we've achieved and maybe in the longer term give some thought to what sort of target we're wanting in there. But I think we're going to, the main reason of it is to get a good, so on the solar farm, it ticks both boxes. It gets a great return and gets rid of carbon. On some of the other ones, we might choose to invest or use it as a reason why the return is lower because the benefits that Amanda spoke about here. And I'm not aware of a specific target that we have. It'll be hard to dream one up, but I think it would benefit us to think about one.
John, if you can.
Noted. Okay, thank you.
Right, any other questions, contributions from members? No. Okay, well, that brings us on to item 9, which is the Airfield Business Park Development Proposal Final Phase, which is on pages 53 to 66 of your agenda packs. You will have noticed that we've had a submission from comments from Mr. King that have been submitted to members of the committee for information. I understand officers will be addressing these comments in their introduction as far as possible. So we're over to John again to present the report. John, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, following on from the comments in the annual performance report of the Investing in Leicestershire programme, the Commission is asked to comment on the proposed revised scheme at Airfield Business Park, Market Harbour on pages 53 to 65 of your pack. The Commission will note that the paper leads with the context about economic growth regeneration and job creation as in line with the change in strategy and reflects the pivot in the investment fund went through from CAIF to ILP. Regeneration of this fallow piece of land is expected to generate 250 new jobs through the construction phase and when operational, adding another £45,000 per job to the local economy. The scheme has already contributed £7 million to the local economy, and we expect the revised scheme to contribute a further £11 million. Given the success of previous phases, we now have the opportunity to close out the scheme with a viable development. As the Commission will have, there is also in for part of the site, which was submitted back in August 21. Since then, due to build cost inflation, the original scheme has become unviable and for the most part undeliverable. However, it was decided that the most appropriate strategy was to allow the current applicant and would be able to keep the viable elements of the scheme, which would be deliverable even if the others were changed. So as per paragraphs 20 to 28, the scheme retains the 16 smaller units, but the rest of the original scheme has changed, and a new application will be submitted to reflect this in October, subject to Cabinet approval to the revised budget and master plan. So as well as keeping the 16 smaller units, the revised scheme proposals include 2 drive-through units and a 60,000 square foot industrial unit. Terms are already agreed with the 2 drive-throughs and the 60k unit, which substantially de-risks the project as nearly 70% will be pre-let and only 30% will be speculatively built. And further, we expect some of those units to be pre-let during the planning and the construction phase prior to the scheme completion in February 26. Turning to the finance elements of the scheme in paragraphs 29 to 58, the Commission will see the underlying assumptions that we have made to ensure the scheme ensure the scheme is built and then occupied and run to budget. High level, the scheme is expected to cost £16.5 million net of the initial land cost of £2 million. It is expected to generate over £1 million a year in rent, which means the scheme has a net initial yield of 5.5%. The underlying assumptions are listed in paragraph 43. The majority are backed either by local evidence, either rents achieved on other phases of the scheme or other local schemes, or in line with the national market normal assumptions, such as 2% capital growth, 7.5% voids, although our portfolio currently runs at 2.5% to 3% of voids. Setting aside £2.3 million for lease end dilapidations, even though the scheme will be let on fully repairing and insuring terms, is also cautiously prudent. The scheme has been costed by external quantity surveyors and includes £700,000 for possible further build cost inflation prior to the signing of a build contract in approximately a year's time, plus a further 10% contingency of the build cost. And we hope to better the initial build cost estimate by procuring a builder through an open tender contract. Question has been raised about the scheme by Councillor King as local member. Councillor King asked if the proposed drive-through uses, whether coffee or other food and drink operators, are in conflict with the County Council's public health policies. And as per the 2 drive-through units at the County Council scheme at Leaders Farm, which received support recently from Harbour's Planning Committee, the use is deemed not to be in conflict with public health policies, but we do consider the health implications on our schemes, and we look for ways in which the schemes can be improved health-wise, such as walking to the scheme or cycling, etc. And this scheme has both cycle shelters and a dedicated cycle route through to the adjacent residential scheme. In any case, the application will be considered on its merits by planning officers once and if submitted. Councillor King also raised the highway impact issues, and these too will be considered by County Highways officers as and when any application is submitted. The project will be subject to the Cabinet paper on the 15th September, and any issues the Commission make will be reported. That's the end of my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Mr. Weston, Mr. Bracken, either you want any comments on this item? No? Okay. Just to say that the comments from the Commission will be submitted to the Cabinet on this item. Does anyone wish to make a comment, observation on this application? No? Okay. Case, the next item, which is item 10, which is the Corporate Asset Management Plan Annual Performance and Strategy Update, which starts on page 67. John Bennett again is going through this item, so I'll hand over to you, John. Thank you.
Thank you. This is my last item. I'm pleased to hear, I'm sure. The Commission will note on pages 67 to 74 the report on the performance and the strategy update of the Corporate Asset Management Plan, the CAMP, and 75 to 115 the report itself. The Commission is asked to note the performance summary of the detail of the report. The CAMP sets out the strategic direction for the management and development of Leicestershire County Council's property assets, and it sits within the policy context of the vision of Leicestershire, the strategic plan and the MTFS. Paragraph 8 summarises the key ambitions for the CAMP, which for this period are to create a greener estate, moving towards self-sufficiency, ensure the focus on delivering capital projects that make a positive difference, to have a well-maintained, energy-efficient set of buildings, with 70% of repairs and maintenance being delivered through a planned programme, and lastly, to rationalise the portfolio through proactively managing asset challenge process, supported by governance that facilitates early decision-making, enabling the potential benefits to be maximised. I do not intend covering the performance strategy update line by line, but instead pick out some notable points, if I may. The Commission will notice in paragraph 11 to 13 that was the overall number of assets has increased from 730 to 731 from 643. The value of the portfolio has decreased by 183 million. This is because of the change in which school freeholds that we own and subject to leases to academies are valued. Because the leases tie up the land for 125 years, they effectively no longer have any worth to LCC in their leased form, and therefore are now valued as such. There's a notional £1 per school per site. Should an academy fold or the lease ended for one reason or another, then its value will be reviewed accordingly. In paragraph 14, the Commission will note the County Council currently holds 115 non-operational assets worth a value of 29 million, comprised of land in advance, which is normally for highway schemes or new schools, etc., managed assets, and this category is almost entirely comprised of properties that either no longer support their original purpose for which they purchased, or formed part of a larger purchase not required to support a service, but have been leased out to generate an income, e.g. the judge's lodgings at Castle House, which is now to be sold. Surplus properties, where properties are no longer required by services, and land held for sale, which is where marketing has already commenced. Turning to the performance of the camp against its objectives for the year, 67% of the KPIs were achieved, 4 were not achieved but had significant improvement in performance, such as planned maintenance, which I'll come back to in a moment, and 29% failed to meet a target, and 1 indicator was not assessed due to lack of benchmark evidence. To briefly cover some of the red items off, the 4 projects that failed to be completed this year were the Quorn Solar Farm, Leaders Farm drive-through restaurants, Bosworth Country Park, which is the ANPR car parking, which is the project was postponed but rescheduled, and the Score Plus project, where a lack of funding meant that the business cases were no longer viable, and so no schools were willing to pursue projects, and we've parked it. In relation to the ongoing projects, there are some skip projects that haven't quite completed yet, and with Lutterworth East and the M69 Stony Stanton scheme in the planning process, as discussed earlier. In relation to the KPIs in section 4, the reds were the level of priority 1 repairs per square foot rose by 1.5% in real terms, but against the background of the overall condition of the portfolio improving and the overall cost of the maintenance backlog falling substantially. Also, total energy costs due to market prices vastly outstripping inflation, project time predictability caused by project overruns from previous years, and the capital receipts target, which the text does explain, all properties were marketed, but some, have overrun. I mentioned the backlog maintenance as an issue, as this is one of the performance indicators which, while did it not achieve its target, somewhat narrow target, overall it has improved significantly. And paragraphs 15 and 16 cover the improvement and the financial constraints that the Central Maintenance Fund has to operate within. Half the annual budget needed just for the most urgent priority issues mean there's not much left to eat into the £50.6 million of backlog repairs and maintenance. This is in the context of more and more properties being added to the portfolio to be managed, such as the property acquired for Social Care Investment Programme. All of these new skip properties need to have new condition surveys now they've been redeveloped by the County Council for the service needs. Paragraphs 18 to 22 outline some of the objectives achieved by the camp for the last financial year. And as regards this financial year, paragraph 23 outlines the key actions being undertaken during this financial year, namely meet the capital receipts target, maximise income and potential cost savings, deliver the school's capital project programme, progress the ACL, museums project, support the review and ongoing delivery of the SKIP programme, continue to deliver the initiatives that support the energy strategy and zero carbon targets, complete the development of the decarbonisation plan and programme its implementation, review the management and letting processes and procedures of the ILP rural portfolio, complete the Central Maintenance Fund's works programme, and further develop the property information system to support the asset challenge. The asset challenge is an item I'd like to conclude with, if I may. The details set out in paragraph B of the report. The asset challenge is there to ensure that we have the right property in the right place and being used for the right purpose. And the Commission is asked to note that this year we've concluded our work on the Blaby and OB Wigston council areas, and you'll see that this work has already identified £5 million worth of capital receipts and a potential revenue cost avoidances of £278,000 a year. I expect to report this time next year on the asset challenge to the County Council properties in Charnwood and North West Leicestershire council areas. This report is not expected to go to Cabinet as it's an update report unless the Commission believes it needs to be considered by Cabinet, but I'm pleased to answer any questions or queries you have. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Nick, Mr. Becken, did you want to go through?
I think the only thing I'd add is it's a good report. I think the action plan covers all of the plans that John's just outlined, and I think it ensures that we're maximising. I think we're sharper. I think we're wiser. And I think we have to do that, and it's the expectation of certainly this Commission and members and the public that we do that. So I think what John's outlined it does that for us. So good report.
So, do members of the Commission have any questions, comments on this? Mr. Bill?
If you could just bear with me a minute, the the issue that's been foremost across the country has been the question of autoclaved aerated concrete. And we've been given the assurance on the 1st of September here that there weren't any schools affected as far as we are aware. I believe that to be the case, and that is welcome news. But I've been concerned for some considerable time about the fact that as members we do seem to be one step or 2 or 3 steps away from knowing exactly what is the state of maintenance of the schools, which I understand is still the responsibility of the county council. The schools are operated by a variety of academy trusts, but as I understand it, responsibility for the buildings remains with the county council. Now, in the case of 1 or 2 schools that I've been interested in, I've heard in the past about ceilings falling in and a general state of disrepair. But when you actually inquire, you're told, well, we'd rather you didn't ask too many questions because we need the pupils to come through the doors. So the schools themselves are reluctant to admit that they've got maintenance problems. And then we're told that there is this sum coming in from the government to pay for repairs. But it's not clear to me whether the sum coming in is going to be sufficient to meet the repairs, whether there's going to be new schools to replace the ones that have got problems. And all these problems occurred several years ago, well before we heard about this concrete failure. So I think it'd be useful if we could have a member's note clarifying who exactly is responsible for the repair and maintenance of our schools. Are we satisfied that they are all up to scratch? Are we getting sufficient money from the government? Are the multi-academy trusts competent to meet the requests? I would just like a definitive statement from ourselves to clarify where we are. Thank you, Chairman.
It is an important issue, Mr. Bill. I think there was an item that went to a Scrutiny Commission yesterday, which can be circulated. John.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to make the same point. There is a paper from yesterday which may help to inform members' views. But with regard to the point made with regard to maintenance, we're directly responsible for the maintenance of the maintained schools. The academies get money from central government, from the DFE, for their maintenance. They may well use that money to pass to us as part of a traded services agreement to undertake the repairs on their behalf, but is the academy trust's responsibility to maintain their properties. You know, as we said before, they've got a 125-year lease on these properties and all the buildings within their red line. So it is their responsibility, and they have the budgets sent to them directly from the DFE in order to do that. But you know, if there can be a note more generally to accompany the paper that went to the Children and Family Services Scrutiny Commission yesterday, then we're happy again to put one together.
So that would be.
Maintained. I don't know where we are with maintained schools and academy schools, because that's been taken out of our responsibility. So we hear once a year more or less where we are, but so maintained schools tend to be the primary schools, do they? And the secondary schools, whatever they're called these days, are the academy trusts, which we're not. And for the larger schools, then the county council is not responsible for the repairs. Have I got that right?
Yes, but the majority of primary schools are also trusts now as well. And there is still, you know, an ongoing programme of academisation for the remaining primary schools to join trusts as and when the trusts believe they're viable to be accepted.
Okay, I just think that there should be far more transparency in the whole system, because of this competitive atmosphere in which we live in, where schools are so desperate to get pupils through the doors that we don't always get the full facts, and we're the responsible. The people turn to us because we are their local representatives. They turn to us and ask questions, and it doesn't sound very good when we say, "I'm sorry, schools are no longer our responsibility." These children are the responsibility of the whole community, and we've got to absolutely make sure that there aren't any more ceilings falling in anywhere. It never used to be like this, and I think we just need a return to some kind of sanity in this field. Thank you, Chairman.
You make an important point, David. Thank you. Mrs. Hack.
Thank you. Probably not massively dissimilar in terms of the sort of the line of question. I'd be really interested to understand whether there's any provisions in the 125-year lease with regards to the management of the estate, because I obviously haven't seen this lease, but having worked in housing for lots and lots of years, that wouldn't be within the realms of of possibility that there was some provision in terms of condition and the quality of buildings sitting on a 125-year lease. So I didn't know if there was anything in there that could be enacted if academies weren't looking after their school estate properly. Is there anything in there? I'm not sure. The other question is about our own maintenance programme. It identifies that we're back on track, but there's still quite some significant bits of work to do. Is there what's the plan to get to the bottom of that? You know, how are we going to manage that long term, and how are we going to manage new maintenance that comes up if we've fallen a little bit behind? Just appreciating that the maintenance sector is pretty much heavy demand at the moment, with assessments of school buildings being picking up surveyor time. But I would just think we'd be really interested to know how we're going to catch up with the maintenance programme.
Okay, in terms of the 125-year lease, as part of the briefing note, if we want to, we include the repairing and maintenance clause within that, just so there's got some clarity as to what we expect of the academies to look after the buildings. As regards the move from reactive to planned maintenance, it is a matter of trying to get ahead of the curve. As you try and firefight the priority ones, the twos then start to become ones, and you end up just with more ones to deal with. So what we're trying to do is to reset the level. And one of the important things about an asset challenge is knowing what properties you've got, where they are, and what state they're in. So what we're looking to do is try and streamline the way in which we collect the condition survey data. We can then process that throughout the property information database, so then we can get a real-time idea as to where we're going to spend our money over the next 3 to 5 years, and work out what properties, if they are too expensive, then the asset challenge should show this. And it should then say perhaps these should be disposed of before investing anything more in them. So it is all picked up in the asset challenge, and hopefully as we go through each of the districts, as the schools get picked up in those districts, the improvements will become to be shown.
I've got Mrs. Fryer. I'll come back to you, David. Yeah, Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the questions from our fellow councillors. I am the chair of the Children and Family Scrutiny Commission, over here in Scrutiny Committee, should I say, and we had this detailed report yesterday. The papers are available for everybody to read, and I have a fellow member of the committee on this side as well, Mr. Frisbee, but we did have the people from the building surveyors. They were there as well yesterday to give us back. And the main thing that came out, now you all saw the briefing note that came out last Friday that was sent to all councillors. All the maintained schools, in other words, the schools that are managed and run by the county council within Leicestershire, are clear of RAC. that have been inspected, and that has been proved. I'm not going into other works that may or may not be needed and that are on the schedule. The Academy Trust, they are all working very hard to bring that, to make sure they meet the criteria and that their buildings are inspected. And as John has explained, Mr. Bennett has explained, they are on a 125-year lease, but as Mr. Bennett has also explained, if during that 125-year lease they stop being an academy school or go to move, then the buildings come back within to county council remit. But during that 125-year lease, and I'm sure there are many people in this room that were sitting here when a lot of schools went to academies and the trust were formed some years ago. It is a repairing lease that they're on. This also covers private schools, schools that are purely private. They set up, they have certain standards to maintain as well, but and they also, because they work on a different term timetable to our schools, Leicestershire is unique that they often go back to school before other schools do, and this is also for the private schools. We also have a member of the committee who was attending yesterday who represents the church schools, schools that are owned and managed by the churches, and they are undergoing their inspections and to date have found no problems with RAC. We did ask, a question was raised yesterday about other private schools that are mainly in Leicester City, which, and excuse me if I get the wording wrong, the Gurdwara schools by the religious school, and they also would come under the same principle, they have to inspect. You may also be pleased to hear that we, as good neighbours, have offered to help, if necessary, Leicester City to inspect their schools or see if we can help in any way. But we were assured yesterday by the Director of Children and Families and that at the moment Leicester City are coping and are doing their own inspection and do have other places that the children, if necessary, can carry on with their education. So I think as far as Leicestershire Council is concerned, and all of us sitting here as county councillors, we can be assured that we are doing everything we can, and then to sort out the initial problem, which has really hit the public of RAC. But we are on top of that, and as Mr. Bennett has said, there is a planned maintenance that goes ahead, and a lot of the schools are inspected regularly, and this has to carry on. It is an expensive job, but at the end of the day, I think we should be very proud of the work that the officers and the departments are doing in this council to protect and maintain our schools. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Fry. Mr. Frisbee.
Thank you, Chair. I just would like to offer Mr. Bill an assurance, really, that I came away from yesterday's meeting feeling that there was nothing more important or took greater precedence than the health, safety and care of our children, our young learners in the schools, regardless of the status of the school they go, private, academy, whatever. And I came away very confident that this was a prioritised item and that our children were safe. Thank you.
Mr. Bill, did you?
They could keep this going all night, but I was just looking at this ceiling here. When was this place built? I'm sure I'm sure we're perfectly safe. Yeah, happy with that, Chairman. Thank you.
Does any other member have any comments to add on this item? No. Okay. Well, thank you very much to everyone who participated in those items, and to John for taking the last 3 items it's appreciated, which moves us on to item 11, the MTFS monitoring and strategy update that starts on page 117. Declan Keegan, the Director of Corporate Resources, is introducing this report and is joined by Nick Wash, Head of Finance, and Simone, you're staying with us for this one, and Mr. Wedgwood and Mr. Brecken. So over to you, Declan.
Thank you, Chair. So the report provides information on budget monitoring for the current financial year, all the way up to sort of the end of period 4, which is the end of July. And it also goes into some of the wider financial context that we've got sort of nationally in respect of local government, specifically looking at the potential risks and issues that are emerging that are going to shape our MTFS as we refresh it over the next few months. You'll see from the report that in the current financial year, we're forecasting overspend of £9 million. And that's an overspend despite benefiting from £8 million extra interest income. So you can see our cost base has gone up by sort of a very significant £17 million. The key driver of this cost increase are adult social care, children's social care, and inflationary pressures. And these overspends shouldn't just be sort of seen as a one-off issue that's contained to the current financial year, but they are pressures that are going to impact the future year of the MTFS. And they're going to necessitate a combination of more savings and council tax increases. So the directors of both departments are developing action plans to try and mitigate some of the sort of the increases that they're seeing, although it's unlikely to eliminate the overspend in the current financial year. So taking them in turn, so inflation is staying high for longer, and that's been kind of well publicised nationally in terms of the economy sort of in the UK. And despite we was allocating sort of an exceptionally high £22 million in the budget, we're still requiring another £4 million, and that's spread across services across the authority. It's not an isolated kind of impact. In terms of adult social care, they're experiencing higher costs of packaging. That's both in terms of the level of care that's been provided, but also the cost to sort of acquire that sort of care. And what we're also seeing as well is people sort of staying sort of in the care support system for longer than they maybe were previously. Sometimes you'll be able to sort of step people down, as it were, and sort of become more independent. So the focus on hospital discharge, which is kind of getting people sort of back out into the community sooner, is undoubtedly kind of contributing to this. And we're going to have to review the arrangements that we've got with health, both sort of in terms of financial and sort of practice as well. Children's social care is overspending by sort of similar amounts, another £8 million. And this is despite the number of children in care being sort of fairly stable for the last sort of 18 months, 2 years. And it's really, and you know, although asylum seekers again is sort of getting sort of the national publicity, that's only £2 million of the overspend. The biggest factor that we're facing is the cost of the standard placements, as it were. And that cost, despite the number of children sort of remain the same, just that cost per placement has been increasing significantly. So again, there's a market management sort of piece there, and how we kind of place children is going to be really important. The level of overspend that we are experiencing, that uses up all of our in-year contingency that we do hold, and that's going to require us to consume reserves if that stays as where we are. So that's not sustainable. We're obviously having to prop our budget up with reserves. And if the position doesn't improve, we are going to have to consider bringing in spending controls. And you'll see this is kind of, it's almost becoming a bit of a hackneyed phrase. It's sort of local government nationally now, that sort of people going through these sort of emotions, as it were, to just try and keep themselves living within their means. But we are getting to that position unless we can kind of turn the corner pretty quickly. As a reminder, sort of looking ahead, the current MTFS to show a gap of £13 million next year that rises up to £88 million. So these current year cost overspends are just going to add directly to that position. And unfortunately, the benefit of the interest income will reduce as the base rates fall back, and also as we kind of consume our cash, whether it's on kind of propping the budget up or on kind of capital schemes. You know, as an authority, we have done sort of well historically at balancing the resources that we've got available, and obviously kind of we're bottom of the pile, as it were, when sort of it comes to sort of money being handed out, balancing that sort of resource available with the services we need to provide. But every year that sort of goes on, you know, it's always, we seem to say it's getting more difficult, and it genuinely is getting more difficult. And I suppose helpfully, CIPFA have published a couple of articles that are of particular note at the moment, and they've started to warn that they expect a Section 1.4 notice from an authority that's, you know, is well run, well led, and it's just fundamentally due to service pressures that, you know, you just can't make the sums add up, as it were. And it's useful that it's CIPFA rather than just sort of somebody who's kind of from within local government, as it were, that's making the statement. And it does reinforce that, you know, despite being doing well sort of historically, balancing the budget, getting accolades for sort of being sort of the most efficient council, etc. We can't be complacent. The position's getting harder and harder, so we need to keep that focus on the financial position. Getting into financial difficulty doesn't result in additional government help. It just results in additional cost as if you've got to dig yourself out of that hole. So at the moment, we've got no indication of local government funding beyond next year, and multiple reforms are scheduled for the next Parliament. So this uncertainty is going to require us to be even more well prepared than we normally are, and difficult choices are undoubtedly going to be required. That's all I was going to say, Chair, on my introduction.
Thank you, Declan. Mr. Weston, Mr. Bracken, did you want to come in with any comments?
If I may, I think the reports, the overspends are where we expect them. I think the demands in children's services and adult social care we know about. We know where we need to concentrate our efforts. I think Appendix B details the works the directors have done. I think Declan just used the word complacency. I don't think we've ever been complacent. I think since sort of my predecessors here and the savings we've made, fully appreciate the pain that being the lowest funded council has. And I think if members look across what's happening now nationally, you can see it's not just us. We are still performing. We'll still be prudent, and we'll still take decisions that we've taken over the years, and we still need to keep on doing that. But I think the report shows. I don't think any members around the table would be surprised to see what the report shows today. That's all I'd add at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Bill.
Say what you'll be saying in another forum, but if Birmingham can go under with all the resources that are being poured into the West Midlands, and we're still going on here, the worst funded authority across the country, probably. Will the government ever wake up to the fact that local government and public services have to be funded properly? If Birmingham goes under, then there's Glasgow and all the rest of them. I just don't understand quite where we're going with this. It is so awful to contemplate, and we just need to fund our public services on a rational basis, which in order to continue to serve the people that have elected us. The whole thing just looks so awful to me. I can't see any. I can't see any upside to any of it at the moment.
Declan, did you want to come back on that?
So just a couple of comments, really. Unfortunately, Birmingham sort of allows government to stay on the sidelines, as it were, because you can point quite easily to kind of poor leadership, poor sort of internal decisions. They just weren't dealing with the problems as the problems were arising, and they just got bigger and bigger. So unfortunately, it's not going to compel government, because Birmingham aren't falling into that category of a well-run, well-led authority. They're just kind of an authority who's been problematic probably for over a decade. So it doesn't necessarily help. And I think kind of the way government seems to be reacting at the moment, and they have been for a few years, is kind of it's crisis to crisis. And the RAC thing is an example of that, where it's kind of what's the biggest crisis at the time, and resources never get poured into that. So you can't see government changing unless they believe local government really is kind of sort of fundamentally going to fall over, which the signs are definitely creaking, but whether it's enough to sort of compel government when national finances are so tight, I'm doubtful. I think it'll be drip fed the minimum that they need to do, to be honest.
Mr. Weston, did you want to?
We like to think that we do demonstrate good leadership here, despite obviously criticism from the opposition. So we have had good leadership. We have made tough decisions, in the face of not only criticism from you guys, but from criticism from our own electorate. I would love to be spending loads more money on highways and transportation and things like all my voters want, but we're constrained by our original commitment to protect the vulnerable, and unfortunately it is the vulnerable that are driving our expenses. So when you go and knock on the doorstep and stuff, everybody knows we're poorly funded. But I still feel doubtful that everybody knows that we are also super efficient. We've cut certain areas to the bone, and the worry I have looking forward, and make it okay for another couple of 3 years, is where do we go next? There's no fat left. There's no low-hanging fruit. All those sort of expressions which have been used for forever. it is difficult. And also, when we go to government and say we want more money, we're not in 114. We're not in desperate straits, and they just say to us, "This is governments of all persuasions, David." Even when we had the coalition government, well, you're doing okay. You're providing services. You may well be low funded, but we want others to copy you rather than you copy Birmingham. But the one thing we must be careful of not doing is ever going to 114, because it does not solve anything. All it does is put inspectors in there and they make you manage with what you've got. They don't give you money. So there's no point thinking, oh, we can go 114, they'll shovel money at us. They will not. They'll shovel inspectors at us, take the decisions away from us. And whilst we're in control here, we will not be serving a 114 notice. But it is getting, as you know, Michael, you've been around us for a long time, it is getting increasingly hard to justify to the electorate that in a way they type of pay more and get less. And the other thing that would take some persuading to them is that 85% of us pay into the system, only 15% take out of the system, and it is getting tougher without any shadow of a doubt.
Okay, Mrs. Fryer.
Sorry, I haven't about the rattle then. I would just like, obviously children and families is what I chair, the scrutiny. And again, we went through this yesterday in great detail, the overspends and what we're doing. And if you look on page 122, paragraphs 28 and 29, that the average cost of putting children in residential care, and unfortunately some children are in residential care, families can't cope, there's family circumstances, the special read, that has gone up by 20% in 12 to 18 months. So now it's gone from 4,800 a week per child to 5,750 a week. And for children that have really hard and special reason needs, it can be as high as £10,000 a week per child because of the need they have. And paragraph 29 explains that to you. Now, again, I have to say that the department is doing its best, and a lot of the costs for some years now, social workers, care workers, we're very low down in the public estimation of careers they wanted their children and grandchildren to go into. They wanted the high flyers and the university graduate going into the city and everything. These people who look after our children and families work their socks off, and we're doing everything we can within the department, within the council, and I'm sure the leader and Mr. Brecken will agree that to do away with having to use agency workers, to do everything we can to encourage people to come and work at Leicestershire County Council, to offer apprenticeships, internships, start-up jobs, and Mr. Frisbee is very keen on this as well as we all are. But it is a very, very exhausting job, and people get burnt out and often change career because of dealing with children and families who are going through unbelievable circumstances that none of us can imagine how we would cope. Also, we're living longer, so adults and families, we need more care. Some people might get rid of us at a certain age, but we won't go into that. And we are also a very popular county to come and live in with high expectation. So we have a lot of younger people coming in who are having lots more children. And I'm sure if we compared the data of the people that live in Leicestershire, the cohorts and the age groups 20 years ago even, and compared it now, it would be really very interesting. But we are almost just drifting along at the same level of income as that. And we're using every way we can. And again, I'm very proud of the officers and the administration of what we're doing with limited fund. And Mr. Bell, you may be reassured all our children are looked after to the very best of their ability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Hack. Mrs. Hack. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think one of the the things that we were anticipating to see is overspends everywhere. I think the difficulty when you set a budget that's going to be really challenging to hit, the risk of overspends is always essentially in the background. I think one of the things though that is quite frustrating is being well managed and well run financially is really important, but we are seeing gaps, and that's because government doesn't provide the resources it needs to actually deliver the statutory services. The issue of looking after children in care is not a Leicestershire issue, it's a national issue. Those fees have gone up nationally, partly because the private sector have got involved. Certainly in my division, I've got many of these three bedroom placements for young people. None of them are Leicestershire supported, they all come from elsewhere, but they generate a lot of pressure on the system. So I suppose there is an element that at some point government's going to have to catch up with the statutory obligations that we have to provide, and it being looked at is these costs are generally just going up, and council tax alone can't bear these increases. So I suppose the leadership team here have been to Westminster many times, is what is coming out of Westminster in terms of a more improved settlement for Leicestershire. Actually, my feeling is other organisations going, taking the 114 route is a bit of a red herring, really, because there's unique reasons why they've gone. Birmingham with their equal pay claim, Thurrock with let's just spend a load of money on private investments. There are some unique issues at hand, but these problems aren't unique. These are national problems. The cost of care, the cost of looking after older people, the cost of transport, all of this has all gone up. So where are we at in terms of getting a fairer deal for Leicestershire to make sure our residents are not put at a disadvantage?
And as you know, we did secure through the Members of Parliament a meeting with the Chancellor. We had a really good, succinct, prepared by Declan, even the Chancellor's office has said it was good, short, succinct way to solve the very low funding problem at the very bottom tier. So we didn't go in there and ask for billions. We tailored it. So it was a mixture of authorities. So there was some Labour, some Liberal. And we pitched him on this 300 million, which in government terms is small beer, solution, which he agreed was a solution. He didn't say he was going to take it, and I don't think there's much chance of him taking it before next year when we've got a general election. Further to that, we now have a meeting with Lee Rowley, who was at the meeting with the Chancellor. I'm seeing him here next week. He's coming on a political basis, so it'll be myself, Deborah, and luckily for us, Peter Bedford, because he stood for a Member of Parliament before, knows Lee Rowley, and now Peter's been picked for Central Leicestershire. I've invited Peter along to the meeting. We'll have the political meeting, and then if we need numbers from Declan or other numbers from the County Council, we can call the chief in. So that's where we are with that. I'm also going to have further meetings with sitting Members of Parliament and probably prospective Members of Parliament to explain to them. So at the next election, when they go there, they go there with the knowledge. I mean, this little document Declan produced was fantastic. We might as well just give them that. It's succinct and was appreciated. So that's where we are. I've been leader 11-ish years, and I've constantly been battling fair funding. To be honest, we've not achieved a lot. We've never got any more money. We did get some more money when Ivan was around with the F40 campaign, but we just have to KBO, for want of a better expression, and hopefully get better funding for Leicestershire residents in the longer term. So that's honestly where we are.
Thank you. Does any other members have any comments on this item? Okay. So, I mean, we've obviously got the the two sort of twin challenges of the lack of fair funding and still the lack of signs that that's going to be changed, and also obviously inflation, which has inflicted heavily on our financial situation. And although it's coming down, the signs I saw, the Chancellor said there may be a blip next month, and the rate of inflation may go up. So it's not.
What it says though, you have to remember, just because inflation comes down doesn't actually help us. That's helpful in the future.
Yeah.
The problem is those increases are baked in. That is the problem. So
Absolutely.
if you go from 10 to 0,
Yeah.
you've still got
Absolutely.
the 10 hanging around. You know, we need to go plus 10 to minus 10 to unbake it, and that's not going to happen.
Absolutely. That was exactly the point I was going on to make, that even if you do hit the Prime Minister's target of 5%, and we're still not there yet, all that happens is all the existing increases are still in the system and prices are going up. They're just not going up at quite the same level as they were before. And I think that the real challenging, frightening situation that the county council is in is summed up in paragraph 10 of the report, which states that we could well be seeing the budget gap going up to 100 million by 27-28, and it says it's inevitable the 62 million of savings will have to increase significantly, which is going to mean really challenging news for residents if we're going to see even bigger savings, because we've already got to a situation, as we've seen, where there's been huge amounts of savings over the years, and we're now hitting really essential services potentially. And although there is the reference to consideration of further council tax increases, I mean, the two challenges on that: number one, people are already going through a cost of living crisis, so inflicting any increase in costs at a time when people are struggling is bad news. But even so, even if you have a 4 or 5% maximum council tax increase from the government, the chances are that is not going to come anywhere near meeting the gap in financial shortfall either. So it really does look like a very difficult, challenging scenario in future, unless there is some miracle with both inflation and funding and other things. Unfortunately, the future, pessimistically looks fairly dark. But obviously, that's something.
It is increasingly difficult, because if you think 80% of what you spend is statutory, when you need to make the savings, you can only save from the 20%. Now, saving 100 million from 20% means no discretionary spend. It really, really is difficult. You're absolutely right.
Does any member wish to? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Declan, for coming to present today, and to Mr. Brecken and Mr. Rushden. We move on to item 12, which is the final item, East Midlands Shared Services Annual Performance Update 22-23. Lucy Littlefair, head of the East Midlands Shared Services, will present the report. And thank you, Nick, as well, for your attendance. Okay, so over to you, Lucy. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Chair. Okay, so report details the performance of East Midlands Shared Services, one of your key back office services for 2022-2023, with also kind of a bit of an insight into the work that we've been doing this financial year as well. Sets out the background just as a reminder that it's a partnership with Nottingham City Council, and kind of how that came about, and then what the themes are within our current strategic plan. The performance summary covers our financial position, which was an underspend of 2.1% as the final outturn for the last financial year, and also, I think importantly, confirms that we're going to undertake a best value review of initially our finance service centre and then the employee service centre next year, just really to ensure that we're still offering value for money to both of the councils in the shared services format, and should, you know, potentially should we be looking at any alternative delivery models, for example, outsourcing? It's something that you need to kind of constantly kind of, you know, make sure you're reflecting on to make sure that we're, you know, delivering efficiencies for both of those councils. One of the big things last year was the decision to actually withdraw from the education sector market. Yeah, and actually the 31st of August was the final time that we will have paid any of the staff working in maintained schools or academies, and they've transitioned to private providers. That was a decision that was taken by the EMS Joint Committee in January this year. The growth section just talks you through some of the work that we do on an apprenticeship programme that we're quite proud of, with payroll, the fact that we've brought some work back in-house in terms of sundry debt from an outsourced provider, and that we're also looking to do similar thing with adult social care debt, which is currently sat with an external provider, and look to bring that in 2024, 2025. Customer-wise, may recall from last year that following the implementation of Oracle Fusion, quite expectedly, as managers and staff got used to it, we'd seen some kind of dips in our customer satisfaction rates, and the report just brings you up to speed as to where we ended the year at, which was close to our target. Technology-wise, ultimately, we're kind of very much a technology-based service. Again, it just talks through some of the work that we're doing, particularly around payroll. It's been around stabilising that service and ensuring that we've got the functionality in place in order to be able to deliver that as efficiently as possible. It mentions that Nottingham City Council actually provide our audit service. We get some services from Leicestershire, some from Nottingham, and unfortunately, due to staff shortages and other work commitments, I believe related to their situation within Nottingham City Council, we're still waiting for the outturn report in relation to our audits from last year. And then finally, it's just to give you a bit of an insight into some of the work that we've got underway this year in the chart. And then I've kind of summarised for you as to exactly where the services are sat.
Thank you, Lucy. Did you have any comments on this, Mr. Brecken?
I think it's just to say, I think the report highlights the challenges that we've had this year. I think Lucy's outlined it, and yeah, I think again it's a sensible approach to the operation that we have under EMS, and obviously the work that we're doing from an audit point of view, looking forward just to make sure that we are in fact again prudent and we're working effectively and efficiently.
Any members have any questions? Mr. Bill?
Obvious one that this is obviously the way to go. Joint working is the obviously way to go as much as we can. It's just a shame, of course, that we've been left out of the, what was it called, the East Midlands regional body, or whatever it's called now. If that, in fact, that is going ahead, it's just a shame that they couldn't have all been incorporated into one combined authority for the East Midlands, and with all the resulting efficiencies that we all need to see. Yes, including the districts, yeah. Mind, I don't, yeah.
Well, I think that it's a bit of a misnomer if it only has two of the 6 counties in the East Midlands, and it's called an East Midlands Authority. Do any other members have any comments, questions on this report? Mrs. Page?
Yes, thank you for that, Lucy. Really good report. Just 2 very simple questions. On point 7, we are looking at an underspent of £101,000. Could you talk me around that? What is that attributed to? And a little bit more details on that. And it all looks really good, but could you tell me how you monitor it and how, you set the targets? I know there's a reference to KPIs, but you have local indicators, and then how is it monitored for effectiveness? And thank you very much.
Yes, no problem. In terms of the underspend position, then that was small underspends across actually all three of the services that we've got. So some of that was holding vacancies actually as people left. So that ultimately, we appreciate we're a back office service and it's about trying to kind of work at, operate as a kind of, efficiently as possible, and to come with an underspend was something that we were, quite keen to do. So that's how we do it. We're constantly kind of monitoring each month, that financial position. And then in terms of the kind of how we're monitored, so I report directly into sponsors of EMSS. Was Declan, it will be Simone and their equivalent at Nottingham City Council, and we meet on a monthly basis, and I take them through from a kind of a strategic point of view as to exactly how we're performing. And then we have a finance service centre and an employee service centre, and our kind of all of our kind of IT infrastructure. And then we have basically account meetings with the councils where we would go into really kind of quite operational targets, the amount of debt that we've recovered, the amount of kind of how many payroll payments, what's the accuracy of those payroll payments, really kind of, quite detailed KPIs that we've got in place around the various tasks and processes that we have to deliver.
If I may come back, please, and say if there's an area that is dreadfully underperforming, I assume you then create an action plan, which again is monitored to outputs?
Yes, absolutely. Whether that was a service that was underperforming, or whether it was a kind of a specific process or task where we were struggling with. I think the thing for us is that we are part of the kind of whole end-to-end process of both councils. So often it involves kind of interactions with managers or interactions with the kind of corporate finance teams. And we work really closely with them, because often at what we do or what they do kind of, impacts on each other. So, that's how it tends to work.
It's just a really simple question. I've obviously noted in the report that the audit was delayed. Has that had any impact on our internal reporting process?
The main thing we use it for sort of internally is as part of our overall annual governance statement and the head of internal audit's opinion on kind of the wider control environment. So Neil did note it as we sort of brought a draft to corporate governance committee sort of just before the summer. So we're hoping it's kind of the position sort of remediate before actually finalise the AGS, which from conversations with Nottingham, we think it will be. So at the moment it feels okay, but you're right, it's one to keep a bit of an eye on.
Any other members have any comments to make on this item? No? Okay. Well, thank you, Lucy, for coming to the meeting today and for presenting and answering questions. The date of the next meeting of the Scrutiny Commission is Wednesday, the 8th of November, 2023 at 10 a.m. As stated at the start of the meeting, there's no urgent items. So thank you to everyone for attending today, and welcome again to Simone for joining the authority and joining us here today, and thank you to everyone else, to Mr. Brecken, Mr. Weshton, Mr. Keegan, for answering questions and presenting today. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.